Welcome to week 245 in Detroit. Saturday Cup of Joe's a little later today, so you probably already had your Saturday coffee. Maybe you'll have your Sunday coffee as you watch this tomorrow, or uh, or if you have Monday off. I wanted to mention that one of the things about the Saturday Cup of Joe is to try to think differently and challenge assumptions and challenge expectations of ourselves and our businesses. I did spend some time this week at an innovation summit that helped me think differently and challenge some things, think differently about our world, our community, our work, my team. And Monday is a holiday commemorating Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s life and work. And so we're off in observance of that. And Dr. King forced people to think differently about other people, to walk in someone else's shoes, to understand not just what unfairness, violence, and injustice looked like, but what it felt like, and what it felt like for tens of millions of Black Americans. And Dr. King had a special ability to do that. And so I just wanted to read some words, a speech he gave at Penn State University, January 21st, 1965. There's nothing more tragic than to build a society with a segment of people in that society who feel they have no stake in it, who feel that they have nothing to lose, who walk around the streets day in and day out with no jobs, who walk the streets day in and day out feeling that life is little more than a long and desolate corridor with no exit sign. And his words and his perspective inspired a lot of people and helped a lot of people see the world differently. And I think that when I think about Dr. King, thinking about my world differently, thinking about each other differently, thinking about respect and dignity, it rings true every year. It rings more true this year in my mind. And there have been so many opportunities. I mentioned humanity and thinking of the humanness of everyone over the last year between the murder of George Floyd and the COVID-19 global pandemic. Today or this week, it feels more like a dignity that I'm thinking about. But something caught me totally off guard this week and caused me to think differently. And so I wanted to bring it up here at the outset, which is, the COVID-19 global um, mortality rate surpassed 2 million. So there have been 2 million deaths uh, caused by COVID-19. And somebody put that in perspective on social media. I saw it on my friend Kyle's Instagram, and she had posted this, but it is the equivalent of 10 passenger jets falling out of the sky every day for a year. That would be 2 million deaths. And the question it raised for me was, would that make you think differently, feel differently, experience that number differently by thinking of it in different terms? And how should we use that as a tool in our personal growth and our professional growth, that changing something from a number, right, to what it feels like, or changing it from a number on a page to compare it to something else. And there's a ton of literature out there about comparisons when they fail and when they succeed. And so I really think it's something I want to look more into. I started doing it as a result of being caught off guard and sort of, I think this cut through the noise for me. 10 airplanes falling out of the sky every single day around the world for an entire year. And what would that cause us to do? What would our reactions be? How would we think about that total? I looked it up because I got curious about 2 million, and 2 million is the entire population of New Mexico. So if we lost the entire state of New Mexico in a year, how would that change our policy? How would that make us think differently? Of course, there's other ways to look at it. Global car accident deaths are 1.35 million. So some people flip this the other way and they want to downplay the COVID-19 response or policies and attribute it to other types of deaths. I mean, neonatal deaths, according to the World Health Organization, I looked up 2 million deaths. Neonatal deaths are 2 million babies a year. So I think trying to put this in perspective of a global health crisis, but also put it in a way that we feel the effects or think about the effects differently. I don't know if that changes anything for anybody. And I don't know if it's a useful tool. I'm putting it out there in the spirit of trying to think differently. You can do it in really minor ways. Nothing as significant, as public health and human safety and human life, but just in physical products versus something like financial products or fictitious products, right? I mean, a mortgage is a agreement, it's a contract, it's a piece of paper. It exists in the trust. It's a legal fiction or a legal agreement. A physical product's manufactured and shipped. And so I teach a law school class in the winter term every Monday night at the University of Detroit Mercy Law School. I teach consumer protection. And we had a big discussion this week about, Elizabeth Warren, when she was Professor Warren, writing about toasters blowing up versus financial products blowing up. And does it help to think of it that way? In your business, if you don't manufacture a product, if you don't ship a product, if yours is a contract or a software or financial instrument, financial product, does it help to think of your product and your innovation, your strategy as a physical thing? Can you constrain your brainstorming to get better results by thinking of it as a physical product? If you took a mortgage and thought about it as a physical um, a physical product that you had to constrain and say, what if I couldn't, you know, use the phone to speak to my client? How could I still get a deal done? I'm not allowed to call them on the phone. How do I originate a mortgage? Or from a real estate professional, how do I close a home loan? How do I close a real estate transaction without having to use the phone? So using constraints like that in the physical world to produce better results or produce better brainstorming is something we've been trying out, and I'm really excited to push that a little bit forward. So I don't want to get too far into it because then it becomes a thought experiment here on the Cup of Joe. But if you're looking to brainstorm, innovate this year, if you're in a strategy role and you want to um, find those opportunities to think differently and disrupt, our group just read the book, The Medici Effect, which talks about intersections of varying industries, groups of thought, ways of thinking to try to find or discover innovation. And so, not so much the epiphany, although that's mentioned in the book, but more so using insights from unrelated fields to find new opportunities in your field or in your industry. And so that kind of got me thinking about a lot of things, but one of them was remote work and the digital environment and what sort of future is going to look like. I saw this great quote in an article. The New Republic published an article about the history of telecommuting, the history of telework, and one of the quotes was, "Don't commute, communicate." Right? And Arthur Clarke, the author, is who's that quote's attributed to. But I thought of that as an interesting way to confront some of the challenges and some of the um, obstacles that telework either presents or claims to present in our businesses. The other thing the article did was spark a new way for me to think about something intangible in the physical world, like I was just mentioning, and that is our time. And the article brought up this idea of, like, what if time was a natural resource that needed to be acquired? What if time was a natural resource that needed to be mined the way gold or iron or something would be? Would it be so easily used up? And how thinking about time as a physical item, does that change how you think about your day? Does it change how you think about your email? Does it change how you think about your work? I don't know. Um, you know, I think it's a matter of perspective. I was thinking this week that the difference between being trapped and being protected could just be a matter of perspective, right? A cat in our house running from a dog in our house, um, may find that they dive into a box or behind um, a cabinet or something like that. And I think of them as trapped. They think of themselves as protected, right? And it brought me to this great line. One of my favorite movies of all time is A Few Good Men. And there's this conversation between Sam Weinberg and Daniel Kaffee where Kaffee's frustrated, thinks the case is over, thinks he's about to lose, has that one big swing left. And Sam is telling him, your dad was this amazing trial lawyer, and I wrote a paper about your dad in college. And he credits Kathy, saying, I saw you going after Colonel Jessup. And Kathy's response is, would you put Jessup on the stand? And Sam Weinberg says, no. Kathy says, do you think my father would have? And Sam says, with the evidence we've got, not in a million years. But here's the thing, there's really no way of getting around this. Neither Lionel Caffey nor Sam Weinberg are lead counsel for the defense in the matter of the U.S. versus Dawson and Downey. So there's really only one question. What would you do? And I came back to that quote because there's really only one question about how we think about these things, whether we think about COVID 19 in the context of 2 million deaths or in the context of a comparison. There's really only one question when we think about dignity and respect. There's really only one question when we think about our work and our time. What would you do? And there's no way of getting around it. We have to answer that question for ourselves, and that's hard. It's hard. You want to be able to point to something else. I know I do, to be able to say that's why I'm making that decision, or I want to be given some evidence that I'm making the right decision, when in reality there's really only one thing, and I can't get around it. What do I think about this? What do I do with my time? And um, and I wanted to end on a question that is a little bit related to this thinking differently theme, but disconnected, because it really is a challenge question that I think you could use in your businesses and your teams. You maybe could use it in your journaling, which is brought to me by an intern. I have a policy intern on my team this year. She's a undergraduate student at Oakland University, and Natalia brought this brilliant question into our one-on-one, and I've been circulating it with leadership teams because I think it does help, again, to turn things on their head and to think differently about problems in our businesses. And that was the IKEA company. We all know IKEA, the large warehouse and furniture and inexpensive home furnishings. So IKEA announced that they were getting rid of their catalog. They're ending the IKEA catalog, and they described it as a emotional but rational decision to end the catalog. And the IKEA had become irrationally attached despite consumer preferences, customer preferences, changing trends, digital. They wanted to keep the catalog. And so finally deciding to end it was hard. And it got me thinking again, think differently. In this case, it's not thinking differently about the physical world as much as it is thinking about the emotional world. What is your business emotionally or irrationally attached to? What is your business um, continuing to do, continuing to believe about its products, services, people, anything that actually has changed? And it's really, um, really a legacy attachment that keeps it around or that changes your value calculation each time you confront this thing. So, how do you create separation to actually try to think about that? I think that's really important, whether it's an innovation, whether it's an innovation meeting, a brainstorming, but how do you create separation and distance from a decision or from the thing to be able to look at it more rationally, or remove the emotional connection to the decision or the history or the story of the thing as you evaluate your business? Do you walk in someone else's shoes? Do you walk in your customer's shoes for a day, your colleagues? Is that the way you do it? Maybe remote work this year, as we talked about, illuminated some of the irrational decisions or irrational connections we have. And now having some distance literally from our businesses and from each other has forced us to evaluate these things differently. I don't know. This week is a bunch of questions, not a lot of answers. But I hope those are challenge questions that help us view our world differently, view our world in more interesting ways, make better intersections and better decisions. And of course, if you have Monday off, perhaps that gives you some distance to reflect, to walk a little bit in someone else's shoes, and to remember the life of Dr. King, who challenged all of us to think differently about each other and about respect and dignity and justice. So thank you. I really appreciate your time as always. Continue to think differently, continue to answer well, and continued success.